Throughout the country, Latinx communities have been hit hard by the pandemic, along with disruptions in the economy and education. Those problems were recently explored in a survey by the advocacy group Latinos for Education, and they have implications for Boston, where Latinos account for more than 40% of the students in the public school system. To tell us about those concerns is the group's executive director for Massachusetts, Lorena Lopera. Thank you very much for being with us, Lorena.
Thank you for the opportunity, Chris. It's great to be back.
Lorena, there are a lot of things you've picked up in the survey and maybe have heard from in conversations with parents, but I guess one main concern for you is the mental health. Why is that so much an issue?
Yeah, so we have gathered the perspective of Latino educators and Latino families across the state of Massachusetts. And one of the findings from the Spanish-speaking Latino families is that 43% of those families, their biggest concern as it regards to their children is the decline in mental health for their children. In the Latino community, that is an incredible statistic, considering how taboo it is to speak about, openly to speak about mental health. And families are sharing that they're seeing their children are sad, are stressed, are anxious. There were anecdotes of families sharing that children are terrified of having a parent leave to go to work or leave the home for whatever reason, for fear that that child will not see that parent again. And so there is a heavy weight that has fallen on our community, and we need to figure out a way to support the mental health of our children, of our students, especially as schools kick off.
Well, I certainly know the way we speak about mental health in English, it sometimes comes out sounding like a problem with a person, but there are problems with circumstances here. And some of these circumstances where people are very strained between food insecurity, rent insecurity, but doesn't that affect mental health too?
Absolutely. So all of these stressors and traumatic experiences are compounding on top of the Latino community. And so children are in homes, and many are. The other finding that we had from families is that there's a huge concern around basic needs. So 52% shared that they were really concerned about income insecurity, what that meant in terms of food insecurity. That was a second concern in terms of basic needs, and being able to stay in their homes. And so we know that families are concerned about this, parents, caregivers are concerned about this, and that stress doesn't stay with the adults, right? Our children see it and they also experience it. And if you're a child and you're trying to figure out, am I going to have a home or a bed to sleep in, or am I going to have food to access, your mind is not going to be able, you physically cannot focus on being able to learn. And so we need to find ways to address and provide the supports necessary to our community.
When I say Latino or Latinx, this is a broad population with different educational needs. One part of that population, they're still learning English. They really need immersion, which probably is a lot better in a school setting than on a computer screen. How can people get that and at the same time overcome fears of their kids going to a building that might not be too safe?
Yeah, so that is a big challenge, and we saw that play out in the spring when English language services were changed drastically. And many parents also shared the concern that they were recent immigrants to the country, their child had just been here a year, that their exposure to English is obviously limited at home because Spanish is being spoken at home, and that was a incredible concern of families. And so I think we need to think through how we are engaging via Zoom, via remote learning, because that is a reality for most districts. And so it can't just be asynchronous. It can't just be recorded lessons. There has to also be interaction. There has to be community building. And so I think that those are all important pieces that we need to focus on to ensure that our children are still safe physically, but continuing to learn, especially our English language learners.
I think in recent months, children of many different backgrounds had some problems with remote learning, but what about the problems among Latinx students?
Yeah, so our community was faced with additional challenges, right? So we can talk about the health disparities and how COVID has decimated the community. We can talk about the financial implications. And then when we talk about the educational pieces, those are some additional significant barriers. So our families and our educators that we convened shared that technology was a really big challenge. So many of our families and students did not have a computer at home, did not have the technology at home, did not have access to Wi-Fi. And so initial connection at the beginning was just impossible. And now I know Boston Public Schools did a tremendous effort to try to get devices to families and students, but that took time. And so there was a delay in being able to engage. I think additionally, the district is creating, the city is creating, the state is creating additional stress on our Latino community by not providing information materials in Spanish at the same time that English is disseminated, if at all. And so we need to make sure that we are not creating more confusion. We need information to come out in Spanish. In Boston Public Schools, the plan prior to the announcement, the latest plan prior to the announcement last week, has still yet to be translated into Spanish. And so families are being asked to provide their decision on what they want their student or their child to do for the upcoming school year, and we still don't have that information. Now, I'm a parent, I'm a Boston Public Schools parent, and it is difficult for me to think through what decision I want for my child, and I speak and read English. Imagine what it would be like to make that decision for your child if you don't know all of the information. It's impossible.
It's one thing you got to emphasize, because you might have children growing up here who probably speak more English conversationally than Spanish, but their parents, that's a different story, right?
Correct. And so we have 42% of our student demographic in Boston Public Schools specifically that identify as Latino, as Latinx. We need to make sure that we're engaging families in their native language. 45% of students in Boston Public Schools have a different language spoken at home. We need to make sure that we are reaching those families, that we are meeting those families where they are at with their language needs, so that they can actually help their child and make sure that that child has access to education.
I know that your organization agrees with the recent decision by the Boston Public Schools to open all remote, but I also note some concerns about the way the Latino community was represented in the decision-making process. Even though there are a couple of Latino members on the school committee, what are the problems with representing the community in those decisions?
Absolutely. And I think this is not just an issue in the Boston Public School system. I think that this is an issue across the nation, across our state. But when COVID-19, when the pandemic hit, news brief after news brief, we were seeing non-Latinos making decisions that were affecting the Latino community. And so it is clear as day that there is a void in Latino leaders being at decision-making tables. And we need to change that. And we need to change that not just for the sake of representation, but to ensure that the solutions that we're putting forth for our community actually make sense, that they will actually work. And so that is why it's incredibly important that we continue to increase the number of Latinos at decision-making tables here in the city, as well as the state, as well as our nation.
Well, you talked about people looking for opportunities for leadership, but this is a pandemic, a crisis really. What about Latino teachers responding to that crisis, doing things in a different way, doing them maybe better? Are there any examples of that you could talk about?
I can speak from personal experience as a mother, as a Boston Public Schools mother. My child goes to a dual language schools here in the system. And the way that those teachers have stepped up is incredible. I just spoke, I'm on the school site council, and I heard that we had a 98% participation rate, student participation rate in the spring, which is incredibly high when you consider all of the challenges. More than 50% of the students in my child's school are Latino. And what did those teachers do? They focused on the people. They had the relationships with the families. They had the relationships with the students. They had the linguistic ability to be able to engage with families and understand what the challenges were so that they could address them. They were helping to translate documents. So all of the information that came out of that school was already in Spanish and English because it's built into the DNA of that school. They were helping families fill out applications for housing assistance or giving them resources to where they could find additional food. So our teachers were stepping up. I had a teacher send information on a video. So not just that this is read in Spanish how you log into Zoom, but a video that somebody could watch on their cell phone to follow the steps to be able to log into Clever or Zoom or whatever platform or portal was being used. So this is the way that our Latino teachers are stepping up. They are meeting the needs of our community because they understand the needs of our community.
It sounds to me, aside from the academic effectiveness here, as if there's this whole other essential mission of a school system. It's not just the education part. It's about reaching out to people and providing services for essential things that they might not otherwise get. Isn't that true about the school system?
Absolutely. And that's kind of a double-edged sword because we want schools to be able to focus on actually educating our children, but we also know that there are all these other factors that impact our child's ability to learn. And so this is why it's incredibly important for there to be a coordinated effort between the school district, the cities, and community partners to be able to provide these services to our students and their families that doesn't take the focus away from education. I love that our teachers were able to step in and provide these supports. I hate that they had to be the ones to do it.
One other question about the perspective here on things you want. I know that you agree with the school department opening remote only, which could be a fairly short period. But even beyond that, under a hybrid plan, there's still going to be a lot of remote learning going on. So what does that say about the importance of getting it right with remote learning?
Yeah, so we know that remote learning in some way, shape, or form is going to be our reality for the foreseeable future. And so I think step one is, do all of our students have devices, right? Is everybody ready to be able to log in on day one? And I don't think we have the information. Where is the data on that to ensure that every single student has those computers and access to Wi-Fi right now so that they can engage? My other point is going back to the multilingual resources and technology. There are workshops that Boston Public Schools is putting out at the moment. That information, the outreach for that has gone out in English. And so even if there are sessions that are listed to be provided in Spanish, our community does not know about it. And so we need to make sure that we are actually reaching the Latino community and students and families in a way that they're going to understand what resources are available. Right now, we need to do the homework to ensure that families and students are prepared to engage in learning on day one.
Thank you very much for taking the time, Lorena. If people want some more information, I know you have a website they can check out.
Yes, please check us out at www.latinosforeducation.org. Thank you so much, Chris.
Right. Thank you very much. Lorena Lopera from Latinos for Education in Massachusetts. We'll have more news in just a moment.